We begin this unit after the resignation of President Richard Nixon in 1973. Remember, after Nixon resigns, Gerald Ford is going to become president since he was the vice president. However, he was what we call an unelected leader, in that no one had ever actually voted for Gerald Ford. He had been appointed as the vice president after Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, who was elected with him in 1972, resigned from his post after a scandal that was unrelated to Watergate. The 25th Amendment had worked exactly the way it was supposed to. Remember, the 25th Amendment is what establishes presidential succession. That means who is going to become president if the president dies in office or is no longer able to perform their duties. It goes beyond just the vice president, however. Remember, we are right in the middle of the Cold War. We want to be sure that if something happened to a large group of our government, that someone would be there to be able to lead the country. It goes all the way down the line. President, vice president, Speaker of the House. Then it goes to all of the different heads of the cabinet members. So this is a very long list of people who would be possible to take the job as president in the event that the president could not fulfill their duties. Gerald Ford is going to have a big job ahead of him. He had to try to bring the country out of a huge scandal, one of the biggest we had ever seen, in the fact that Nixon had actually resigned. That is going to be a major problem that he has to try to overcome. Trying to restore honesty to the presidency after the country not only did not trust the president because of Vietnam, but now the Watergate scandal as well. Unfortunately, the fact that he pardoned Nixon soon after he took office did not help his cause. Many people in the United States believe that Nixon should have had to stand trial for his actions. However, historians now look much more kindly on Ford's decision to pardon Nixon, in that he believed that it would be much better and much easier for the country to move on past this scandal as opposed to possibly having a long, lengthy trial, followed by the possibility that a president of the United States could even face jail time. Given that we were right in the middle of the Cold War, this obviously wouldn't have been good either. His policies are going to be mostly targeted at our economy. We were having serious problems with inflation. Remember, inflation means that prices are going up. He's going to begin by asking for voluntary reduction of our energy resources in a program called Whip Inflation Now, or WIN. This, unfortunately, did not work very well. He is then going to attempt to reduce our money supply through raising the interest rates. When you raise the interest rates, that is going to decrease the amount of loans that banks are making, which is going to mean that people aren't out spending money the way that they would if interest rates were lower. This is going to cause a recession in the United States. Remember, a recession means that our economy is not doing well. Where some presidents almost never use the veto, Gerald Ford is an exception. He was only in office for 2 years, but he vetoed over 50 pieces of legislation in those short 2 years. His greatest accomplishment would be what's called the Helsinki Accords. This was an attempt at trying to get Eastern and Western Europe to cooperate on various matters, including economics. Again, we're still in the middle of the Cold War, so he is attempting to try to make these Cold War problems a little better. The 1976 election is going to bring Jimmy Carter, a former governor of Georgia, who is also a Democrat, and a former peanut farmer. He was going to run as an outsider, meaning that he didn't have any political ties to these Washington insiders who have been so involved in all these various scandals. He promised to bring integrity to the office, and it was the fact that people looked at Carter and listened to Carter and felt like they could really trust him. It was those traits that are going to win the 1976 election for him. His agenda is going to be trying to ease our energy crisis. In order to do that, he is going to create the Department of Energy. Unfortunately, Even though he's trying to take steps to lessen this crisis, our economy was worsening, and there really weren't any programs that were helping. Most of this was because we were in the middle of a changing economy, an economy we still see changing today. Our manufacturing was decreasing, meaning those factory jobs that are unskilled labor. We didn't need as many of those jobs anymore, and it was cheaper for other countries to produce those goods and make those goods since they did not have the regulations that were in place that caused our production costs to go up here in the United States. So those types of jobs were going other places, while our technology and service industries were increasing. This is a major change in our economy since generations and generations had worked in those types of factory jobs. Our local economy here in Lenoir is still facing some of these issues with our changing economy. You will also see a greater influence of minorities in Carter's government. He is going to appoint minorities and women into positions of power within his administration. When you think of Jimmy Carter, you should often think of human rights. He is going to do a lot to promote human rights throughout the entire world. One of the steps he takes was by giving up the Panama Canal. He signed an agreement, although it made many angry, to give control of the Panama Canal back to Panama on December 31st, 1999. This definitely helped our public image throughout the world, specifically in that region of the world. And we did give up control of the Panama Canal on December 31st, 1999. Unfortunately, even though Ford had worked to attempt to keep the Cold War tensions at bay, we do see a breakdown of Nixon's policy of détente, which meant to ease tensions of the Cold War. We see that when the Soviet Union is going to make a play and invade Afghanistan in an attempt to get their oil. Later, he will win the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in attempting to promote world peace. He is still very well known for his efforts to promote peace throughout the world. Carter's greatest accomplishment came from the Middle East. In what are called the Camp David Accords, he was able to negotiate a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. These two countries had very long been at war. There had been very long talks about peace, but no progress made. Jimmy Carter brought both leaders of these two countries to Camp David, where he was able to, over a period of weeks, negotiate an agreement for peace in the Middle East. This was unprecedented. Unfortunately, Carter's greatest defeat also came from the Middle East. In what becomes known as the Iranian hostage crisis, a hostage crisis is going to occur when the Shah of Iran, who had been pro-American and had pro-American policies in Iran towards the United States, is ousted and run out of power. Once he had been run out of power and ousted from the leadership of Iran, Carter allowed him to enter the United States for cancer treatment. After Ayatollah Khomeini took power, he was the Muslim cleric, meaning he's a religious leader who's going to take control of Iran. Once he takes control, Iran becomes much more fundamental in their beliefs. They are going to demand that the Shah of Iran be returned to Iran so that they can possibly press charges against him and where he may stand trial. Jimmy Carter refuses. When he refuses, Iranian students storm the U.S. Embassy in Iran and take Americans hostage, and they are held for over a year. Carter worked tirelessly to get these hostages freed, but he was never able to do so. In fact, they were not freed until the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as President of the United States in 1981. We also see a new movement beginning. The environmentalist movement is going to take shape in the 1960s into the 70s and beyond. Rachel Carson's very influential book called Silent Spring is going to discuss the dangers of pesticides and pollution on our environment and on the wildlife. We also see the establishment of the EPA. The EPA stands for Environmental Protection Agency. Its job is to set and enforce pollution standards. It's going to conduct that environmental research to see the impact that various chemicals have on our environment. It also tries to help state and local governments in controlling the pollution in their districts. We also celebrate the very first Earth Day in 1970. Alaskan conservation also comes on people's radar. And the whole goal of it was to not only protect the environment, but the native peoples of Alaska as well. There were many valuable resources found in Alaska that we wanted to be sure that we did not destroy the environment of Alaska in an attempt to get to those natural resources. We also didn't want to destroy the livelihoods of the people living in Alaska. One of the most well-known resources there is oil. It is still a debate today about how much we should drill for oil there in the event, since it is going to create so much damage to the environment. Another major debate comes in the form of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy tends to be very, very efficient, and we have a lot of power that comes from it. Unfortunately, incidents like what occurred at 3 Mile Island, where a nuclear reactor overheats and releases radiation into the environment, is going to raise many concerns. When radiation is released into the environment, it is not the type of accident that can just simply be cleaned up. It is something that must be contained and something that lasts for decades. So this is going to be a major concern. And we even see the establishment of groups like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, whose job is to go in and keep eyes on this industry to make sure that they are being held to high safety standards. This continues to be a movement, especially given that we see more nuclear energy being used, yet we also continue to see accidents happen, not just here in the United States, but in other countries as well, like we saw after the tsunami in Japan, where that is going to cause damage to one of a nuclear plant there, which released a tremendous amount of radiation into the environment. That radiation can cause many diseases, including cancer, and many troubles for many years to come. So this is something that we continue to keep our eye on.